Testing, check, 1, 2, 3. Hello, welcome to Ninja Robot Studios LLC stream, where I play video games and VR experiences and talk through them from a UX designer's perspective. I am Aletha Singleton. I'm an immersive tech UX design instructor and designer and content creator, and I have over 22 years of experience creating designing solutions for web, desktop, mobile, and most recently VR. And think of this as kind of an inexpensive and less academic and version of a university labs class. There are tons of classes out there. We are getting more and more classes out there all the time around UX in general and UX for XR. So this is more of a supplement to that. And each week I go through and I'll play a game, and I go by genre. So right now we're working on training simulations, and we'll talk about the best practice of the UX best practices for gaming specifically. And we'll talk about, since this is a training genre that we're going through right now, we'll talk about best practices for training in XR. We'll go through at the end of each session. I'll make comments as I play through the game, and then at the end we'll go through a Rose, Thorn, Bud method of critical thinking that is a quick and good method of writing down the things that are going well, things that aren't going well, and what opportunities or next steps we see. If this were a real project, what would our next steps be? What would we need to follow up on, and so forth. And this is the hopes is that by you watching and participating in the chat, or preferably you're watching live and participating in the chat, but you could also watch the videos on demand later and make comments on the videos. I do check those and respond to those. But this gives you experience, practical experience with this critical thinking method of analyzing software applications based on a certain genre. And so this is a method that I use for competitive landscaping. Competitive landscaping is one of the upfront exercises that you do when you start a new project. You'll go through and you'll see, how have other people solved this problem? What works well for that? What are the things that don't go well for that? And there's a train coming that's probably going to honk right outside of my home. And what are the things that we would like to do better, filling gaps and so forth for our solution based on our target audience and based on what we've learned from these other things. And so that's competitive landscaping. And I'm surprised that the train hasn't honked yet. I get very distracted by them, sorry. Competitive landscaping is a part as how we do that. And it's how we see how others have solved problems to help us It's just like you get our inspiration for art from other artists, we get inspiration for design from other designers. And this is how we do that. And so by you participating in the chat and you watching this live, or if you don't have time to live, on demand, and participating with that on demand, then this is getting you practical experience working on this exercise. And that's only going to help you. It's only going to help you, and you can actually say, hey, I have worked on side projects with people on side exercises, just trying to build my skills, working on this critical thinking of these designs. And that's only going to help you, because employers love to see passion and you going the extra, making the extra effort to get into a space. If you're trying to get into a space, it is beneficial and gives you a little bit of a competitive advantage when you do that, when you make that extra effort. And it is very difficult. We all are very busy, but that does help if you're trying to get into a new space. And then after that, if it is not an XR game, which like the one we're going to be going through today is not an XR game, we'll talk about, well, what did we learn from this that we should translate? What do we need to think about if we were translating this into XR? And then if it is an XR, what can we learn from it to make sure that we're doing this or not doing this in our XR experience? So before each session, I talk about, we use this book called by Celia Hody called Gamer's Brain. Excellent book. I highly recommend it. How neuroscience and UX can impact game design, video game design. And this is, yes, for 2D, but we look at 2D and 3D because game design has a direct and heavy influence on VR design and XR design. The team structure that is set up for game design is the same team structure you would have for XR design. It's got a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same methods. So it's just different best practices because we're dealing with XR, which is altering our senses and our perceptions of reality, whereas video games are just looking at a 2D screen. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference in best practices, but there's a heavy and direct influence. And I did find that when I was doing early usability testing on my own research, when I started getting into this space, we did some research to validate best practices that I was writing. And one of the things that I found was that people's experience playing video games had a direct impact on how, or influence on how they received or experienced VR, and probably will be the same for XR, like mixed reality and AR. I didn't test those specifically, I tested VR, but it was a direct influence on their expectations and their reception of VR. Those that were heavy gamers would say, well, I would expect it to behave this way because this is how it is in video games. And so it was an absolute direct impact. And then people that don't game as often, it just tended to have more difficulty picking up the how to interact with the controllers and so forth because they don't game. So then you have to think about that because the game influence, again, it has direct impact. And so that's why we study game design. That's why I'm studying 2D games, not just 3D games. And so before we play each game, we're going to go through the pillars of UX for gaming UX. You find them in all of my post-its. So we have 7 pillars of gaming UX. And she has broken them down by usability and engageability. So you generally, if you're familiar with Nielsen-Norman heuristics, you'll notice that I believe there are 10 base heuristics, if my memory serves me correctly, and it hasn't changed. There are 10 basic heuristics from Nielsen-Norman group that they use as a heuristic evaluation. Then there's a lot of sub-detail that goes into that, depending on if you're doing a formal heuristic evaluation, but there are 10 like major categories. And however, for gaming, there are some categories that don't really translate over from application design to game design. So she has removed those and added game specific ones, and those are the engageability pillars. And so signs, and so for the usability, those are going to be the ones that you recognize from, if you're familiar with the Nielsen-Norman heuristics, you're going to be familiar with these usability pillars because they come from that. Signs and feedback, clarity, form follows function, consistency, minimum workload, error prevention, recovery, and flexibility. Those are directly from there. But then these new categories of engageability for gaming, 3, are motivation. I think that the Miro app just thinks that I'm making a mistake trying to interact with something when I'm not, so it's trying to give me tips, which is interesting. That's an interesting thing because some people do have. It doesn't know that I'm just purposefully highlighting it because I'm talking about it. But yeah, I mean, most people. Well, I don't know. They'd have to do some research on that. But tooltips popping up. That's actually a good little thing to design into your applications. If you think somebody's making an error or doing something, they're not sure how to interact with it. Because I'm just standing here talking about these post-its. That's actually something that I have suggested that you design into VR applications if they don't seem like they're sure what they're supposed to be doing next because they're making random interactions or spamming the buttons or so forth. Then you could consider showing tooltips to say, well, this is how you can proceed. Whatever. Anyway, back to this engageability. These are the game-specific pillars of UX, and that is motivation, emotion, and game flow. So we will quickly go through these so that we can have them fresh on our minds as we think through the game that we're going to play, and then I'll also go through training best practices. Signs and feedback are all of those visual, audio, haptic cues, and so forth that are informing us about what's going on in the game. They encourage us to click on something or go somewhere. The signs, and then the feedback is giving you a clear reaction to let you know, was that successful? Was that not successful? Can we do that right now? That's feedback. And then clarity is that those signs and that feedback needs to be clear so that you understand what's going on. And all the typography, the color for contrast, the font usage, all of those things, the UI design should be clear. You should be able to quickly prioritize the information and quickly decide what's currently relevant and what's not currently relevant, depending on what task you're trying to do. And you should be creating your UIs and all of these signs and feedback to be perceivable but not intrusive. They should not intrude on the gameplay or be confusing. And form follows function is the design of an item, the character icons, the character designs, and so forth. All of that should be conveying its function. So think about Don Norman and affordances. As chair before it's sitting, a doorknob before it's turning. And what do we do with headphones? We know to put them on our head. That's an affordance. And cover our ears with them. That's an affordance. And we know we expect to be able to hear something when we put them on, if we've got something playing. And so the designs should intuitively inform us how to interact with something. And then consistency is that all of your designs, your character designs, there should be some kind of consistency, not consistency for consistency's sake, but say all of your, depending on your game, of course, because you may purposefully want people not to know who's an enemy, who's a friend. But for example, if you're playing a standard MMO or a standard solo game, and you want to differentiate the enemies from the friends, there are certain designs like labels and so forth that you put over the head of the enemy to differentiate them from the friends and so forth. And this should be consistent so that it's clear, unless, again, of course, it's part of the game mechanic purposefully that you want there to be some kind of some kind of insecurity as who's your friend, who's your enemy. And like even the gaming mental models for the genres, for example, platformers have certain expectations of how certain mechanics behave in platformers. Tabletop RPGs have certain mechanics and expectations for how those work in general, and so forth. So you want to, training definitely has things that you need to design in there to have effective training. And there are certain mental models, though, that come out of that, and you want to be consistent with those mental models, and you want to also be consistent with pay attention to regional controls, especially if you're doing international games. There are mental models depending on different countries that you want to understand those so that you're not causing confusion when you switch to when you release your game in a new country. So you want to be sure to study your target audience in these different areas and how they expect things to work, including not just on the actual game itself, but on the hardware. For example, I like to give the example constantly about Sony and how the Sony controllers have different mental models depending on which region you're in. And they use shapes instead of letters. And the shapes mean different things in different countries. So you use a different button. For example, in Japan, the meaning of the X and the O are different. They're opposite. So you're using the opposite buttons when you play a Japanese game, as opposed to when you're playing in a game made in the West. So that is a mental model that you need to understand, because if we play a lot of games, our muscle memory kicks in and we'll push a button for back, because that's always the button for back. Regardless of the game on the Sony, that's almost always the button for back. However, if you're playing a Japanese game on the Sony PlayStation, it might be opposite. You might have to push the X button for back. And then that muscle memory, since they have that muscle memory already instilled in them without thinking, it's going to take an extra amount of cognitive load for them to push the right button, and it's going to cause a lot of accidents in interactions, because their muscle memory reacts before their actual cognitive memory does. So you want to keep that in mind when you're designing these things across regions and nations. And then that goes into your workload. Minimum workload, that is your cognitive load and your physical workload. The cognitive load, like I just mentioned, is our muscle memories are going to battle with our mind all the time if there's an inconsistency in a type of interaction that we're used to in our region. Then that's going to cause an extra amount of cognitive load that's not necessary. And also, if we don't have the right tooltips up for the game, then what we're playing. So a big problem that is constantly happening is there will be I use Sony controller because I have a PlayStation. I don't have an Xbox, but since I play a lot of games on Steam and on the PC, there seems to be some kind of expectation that everyone must have an Xbox controller if they have a PC. Sorry, not sorry, that's not the case. But all of the tooltips are made for the Xbox. I have a Sony. So it takes an extra amount of cognitive load for me to sit there and figure out, okay, that's the Xbox controller A button. What does that translate to on my Sony controller? Because my Sony controller doesn't have letters, it has shapes. And there's an extra amount of mental workload there that's not necessary if you just set up tooltips and support for the different controllers that are possible. And that's my recommendation. Just support more controllers. I'm not the only one that uses a PlayStation controller on their PC. I promise. So anyway, that is cognitive workload. So that's anything that is taking up their attention or their memory that's not necessarily part of the game mechanic. That's too much workload. So you want them to be able to focus on the game that they're playing, or in our case, since we're doing training, you want them to focus on the information that they're supposed to be learning, not on how to interact with the world, and not on how to move around or whatever the UI is. Their focus should be on what they're learning. And their mind needs to be focused on that, and their workload needs to be on that, not on how to interact with the world. So that is workload. And then physical would then be how physically cumbersome or tiresome is this thing that you're doing. Are you setting up the UI to be, is it well designed and well thought out so that like things are together? Like if you have a certain workflow, and assume that these are 2 buttons in a workflow, these two, the usability and engageability. Assuming these are 2 buttons in a workflow, and you have, and you're constantly using these 2 things together. It would not make sense for you to then have one of these buttons up here in the top left corner and then the other one down here in the bottom right corner. If they're always used together or almost always used together, it would make more sense to group them side by side. Otherwise, it's a lot of workload and it's unnecessary. Unless, of course, for whatever reason, it's part of your game mechanic that it's supposed to be that way, but for the most part, it's not. So that's what we mean by workload. How cumbersome is it? How many clicks or interactions does it take to do that thing? Is it some crazy combination of buttons that are unnecessary if it's something that's done all the time? Or if it's a master move or a higher level skill move, then fine. Let that be a little more complicated button interaction. But if it's something that they're just using all the time or for daily stuff, don't make it complicated. Overly complicated. Cumbersome. So the interactions should not be cumbersome or overly complicated unless, of course, they are part of the game mechanic that they are to be complicated. And they should be able to focus on the game mechanics or the features of the content and less on the interface and controls. That's what I was saying earlier. And so error prevention and recovery is around, we should be able to anticipate what kinds of things could go wrong and then try to prevent those things from happening. And of course, this is not talking about game mechanics again. It's talking about just mistakes that people can make, accidentally backing out of something, accidentally closing the game without saving. Those kinds of things are things we want to prevent from happening. So how can we do that? And you can post them. You can pop up a little message saying, hey, you're about to exit the game. Do you want to save? Do you want to return to the game? So forth. And let them be able to recover and do whatever they need to do for that. And that's what we mean by error prevention and recovery. And then flexibility is around, so the more customizable the game is, the better it's going to work for more people. So for example, in terms of control mapping, font sizes, and so forth, the more accessible it is to people, to players, including players with disabilities, the better it's going to be for everyone. And you don't want to forget about the people with disabilities. We all are affected by that, even if we don't want to admit it. As we get older, we begin to have more issues with our body, with our eyes, with our ears, and so forth. And we need to design that in mind, because otherwise you're leaving out a huge number of people who want to play your game. So make it flexible enough so that they can also customize it to meet their needs. Font sizes, people with sight visual issues should be able to adjust the font sizes and the color contrast and so forth. People with color blindness, there are tons of people with color blindness out there. How can we make sure that they can adjust it for their needs so that they can see and effectively play the game? And controllers, there are people with motor function impairments who may not be able to use standard controllers or a keyboard. I don't have motor function impairments, but I am small and my hands are very small. And I have certain wrist, I have RSI, carpal, it's not carpal tunnel, but it's like it. It's a different one that's in my wrist. And so my tendon in my wrist is messed up. And so that then limits things that I can do for long periods of time because it'll start hurting. And so I'm not as good on a keyboard. It hurts me to play. It's not as comfortable on a keyboard as it is on a controller, on my Sony controller. So I prefer to have that hooked up. Whereas not all games support controllers, which is frustrating for me, and it makes it more difficult for me to play the games. And again, I have small hands, and I can't reach all the buttons that need to be reached all the time. for certain game combos and so forth. So it's a little bit more difficult for me. And so having the game customizable, it's not just for people with accessibility issues, like disabilities, but if we design for those people, then we are making it better for everyone. And that includes language also. Again, that's not a disability, but we need to be able to adjust languages so people in different, even if we're targeting America, look at all the different people that live in America, different languages that are here. It's a melting pot of all different nations and languages, and that's what it was meant to be. And we need to accommodate that. If we are, yes, English is the predominant language, but if at all possible, I know, yes, it is expensive. It is expensive to support multiple languages, but it is very beneficial to people when you do. If you can, when you do. And like, yeah, difficulty levels, also audio levels. I have very sensitive ears, so this music that we're listening to right now, I have it turned down really low. It is incredibly loud to me. It's making me talk louder than usual because it's so loud to me. But it's not loud at all. I think it's turned down to, what do I have it turned down to? 21. I usually have it at 11. I think I turned it up so that y'all could actually hear it on the stream. But it's very loud to me. So being able to adjust the audio levels in the game, separate the voice from the background music, from the sound effects, so that people with hearing issues or sensitivities can adjust the sound so that they can better enjoy and understand what's going on in your game, depending on their needs. That is flexibility. And then engageability is what's the motivation? How are we motivating them to continue playing this game? Because I have tried games that I had zero motivation to continue playing because I just felt that they were boring. And maybe it's because that wasn't the type of game that I enjoy. Other people enjoy those games. Maybe it's your target audience, sure. But what is the motivation that's keeping people playing your game? What's motivating them to continue playing the game? And there are certain factors that go into it, interest being one of them, of course, but feeling of competency, autonomy. Do I feel competent playing this game? Do I feel like I'm just crap at it? Because if I feel like I'm crap at a game, I'm not going to keep playing the game. I'm not motivated to keep playing the game. Unless there's something else motivating me to keep playing the game. You want to focus on that meaning and that purpose and that value, and giving them a feeling of competence. And that comes through the game flow, which is the last pillar, and is the difficulty curve and the pacing of the game. How you start with easy, with simple interactions, the base interactions that they're going to need for everything, and then you slowly work your way up and slowly get more complex as the game goes. What's the pacing of that? Because if it's too slow, then it could get boring, which was one of the problems I was having with one of the games I was trying. And so I had no motivation besides they were constantly popping up pop-ups to pay money for various things, which was really annoying. Don't do that either. But yeah, what is that pacing? And then emotion is, what kind of emotions are we giving? What's the game feel? The polish of the game, the sound, the lighting, the music, everything. How does that story, how is all that working to portray some kind of emotion? What surprises, what delights, so forth. That is the emotion. That's the engageability of the game. All of these things work together to create a great video game. And I highly recommend the book, Gamer's Brain. I'm still constantly reading through it. There's a ton of information in there. She does have more books. She just released, I think it was this year or late last year, she released a new one. I think it's called Gaming Psychology. I have not had a chance to read that one yet, but I'm sure it's just as good. And now let's talk about best practices for training, because we are talking about training genre. These best practices are based on my own experience because my experience has been in the training simulation, training with consequences sector for enterprise. And so these are from my experience, my research that I've done on the topic. And you always want to, I was actually doing usability testings with target audience, with actual users on actual training simulations. And this is the learnings from that. Regardless of the subject matters of your training simulation, or whether the target audience is an XR novice or expert, someone who is used to playing VR or XR, or whatever your platform is, these best practices will help you create better experiences for them. And again, like I said, the ultimate goal of training in XR is to train people on the content being taught, not on how to interact with the virtual environment or the technology. And we did talk about that earlier. So first of all, you need to know your target audience. Who is it that you're trying to teach, and what are you trying to teach them? As with any type of software development project, any type of application project that you're doing, it is very important to remember that we are not our target audience. We are much more heavily involved and experienced with this technology, especially if we are on the team. We know more about it. We know the ins and outs of the whys of how the application that we are creating works. And whereas the people in our target groups that are going to be using this thing on a daily basis do not. They are not. For the most part, VR is still new. Most part, you're not going to have power users. The majority are going to still be new to XR. So you need to remember that when you're creating training experiences or any kind of VR experience, XR experience, you need to remember this. And so our things that we take for granted, like how to grab something, all the little quirks of the various input methods that we use in XR, we take those things for granted and we know how to work through those things, but not everyone does. And it can be very, very intimidating to them. So we need to remember that and keep that in mind when we are designing our experiences, especially our onboarding experiences, because there's going to be a lot of information overload going on here. Because not only are they learning this content, so there, first of all, whenever the first time you ever put on a VR headset, the first thing, you're just awed about how immersive the world is. And if you haven't and you're here learning about, I highly recommend you put on a VR headset. Even if it's just a cardboard headset, put one on and see what it's like, because you can't design for this stuff if you've never experienced this stuff. So put a headset on. First of all, there is an awe factor that takes away a lot of that really distracts people. And it takes up their focus as they're just awed by the world. So you have to give them time to get over that initial awe factor. But in addition to that awe factor of just putting the headset on for the first time, we're also expecting them to learn something or digest information. For example, onboarding them into the sim or teaching them the actual content of the sim, the training. And we need to remember that. And it's a lot of information to take in. And we were talking about that earlier, workload, cognitive workload. As much as we are used to it ourselves, we need to realize that they are not. And they are going to need time to adjust and time to digest. And we need to create our training simulations in a way that's going to let them do that. And as such, we need to ensure that the experience is designed in a way that they have control over the progression of the content and the story, since they need extra time, and every person's going to need a different amount of time to digest everything that they're seeing and experiencing. And if they're in a classroom setting where there's multiple people, one person's in a headset and one person is, and a bunch of people are sitting around watching the person in the headset, and you've got an instructor talking to the person in the headset as well, that's a lot of distraction going on. So if you're not letting them progress the content at their own pace, then they are not going to be able to learn anything because it's going too fast, and they're not going to be able to process it because they've got all these different things going on at once. Awe factor, content, playing in the game, instructor talking to them, class talking to them. It's too much. So they need to be able to go at their own pace and have discussions as needed. In a classroom setting, very much so. But even if they're solo and they're doing this training solo, let them go at their own pace. Let them manually progress everything so that they have that time to digest. And don't forget what's the goal of the experience. And you want to know this before you start creating your experience. Because is it a competency test? Is it to train something on a new skill? Is it to bring awareness to something? It's fine to have multiple goals. It's fine to do that. But whenever you're designing out, the sooner you know those goals, the better. And you also want to think about your information architecture in light of that. Because I found in my research that you need to separate out some things and design things in certain ways depending on what those goals are. So for example, training on a new skill would potentially be a separate module than testing them on the competency of that skill. Separate modules within that experience. So that's how you would set up your information architecture for that. And I talk about that as well in this article. I highly recommend Training for XR. I'll put this in the show notes as well as here in the chat. You can get all of my best practices if you check out the About section on my Twitch page, or I'll put them in the show notes for the videos on demand. If I can remember what my command is here for website. Yeah, that's it. You check out all the best practices, all the content on there, and then also everything, all the things. I think I created a command for Linktree, maybe? Yes, I did. Okay. I will include that in the show notes as well. The guidance and instruction is when you're providing guidance and instruction for the content that's being covered, you want to make sure that the trainees or the students know the goal of what they're supposed to be doing, why, and how to accomplish it. And then you give them very clear calls to action, very clear goals throughout the experience. Let them go at their own pace. Give them a clear goal to focus on and complete. Don't give them a lot of distraction. You want to restrict their choices to explore the world, because that can be too distracting and they'll forget what they're supposed to be learning. So you give them focus and give them control over when to move on to the next task and so forth, and provide clear wayfinding to those things. So specifically for tutorials and training, you want to have them move in a linear path, provide the goal, enable them to complete the goal successfully. And then on successful completion, give them the options to proceed to the next goal, try again, keep practicing, and so forth, and repeat the step. One, if applicable, you just provide the goal, enable them to complete the goal. Upon completion, give them an option. And then competency assessments, you're going to give them clear objectives and then offer memory cues for controller interactions while trying not to give away the correct answers to the assessment. And then give them a way to indicate that they've completed the objective. Don't just assume they've completed it. Give them a way, because that could potentially give away the answer. And provide an assessment review of success or failure, and give them the option again to try again or proceed to the next objective. Because I have found in my research that if they do fail, they often want to try again, because they want to see what they... And there are ways of providing the assessment that I show here. It's like, let them learn, what did they do wrong? What did they do right? Why? So let them explain what was incorrect, what was correct, and so forth in their review of their scorecard. And this is an example of a storyboard that I created once for a global pattern for training simulations. There's a ton of content here, and I could just go on and on about this, but let's get to the actual training thing that we're working on today. And that is Car Mechanic Simulator, if I can get the thing to actually work, because I have been having issues getting this game to work. It's been crashing on me. It's just the free demo. This is the... Last week we did Mars Rover Mechanic Simulator. This week we're doing a car mechanic simulator. And the free demo is very limited. Of course, we're not going to get to do much, so it'll probably be pretty short. But this is just teaching you how to work on different cars. And I think, so work your way to a service empire, get your hands dirty in a highly realistic simulation game that pays major attention to detail. Pay a visit to a new auction house and buy cars in various conditions. Expand your range of services by investing in a new workspace and equipment. So it's just basically letting you buy cars and rebuild them. There are tons of DLC to work through different types of cars and so forth, more motorcycles and all that, and cars. So this game is the demo of this game is what we're going to be doing today. Let's get started on that. Give me a moment to get that set up. And hopefully the game works. I'm using my mouse. Okay, there it is. Okay, I'll be using my mouse because I don't think this one supports controllers. Let's take a look at their settings. Okay, because we want to see what kind of flexibility they offer. So you can adjust your resolution and so forth. I'm wondering if part of my problem with getting it to OBS to pick it up sometimes is because it's on full screen instead of a maximized window. Not sure, but you can set. This is also for performance and so forth. And your graphics, they let you adjust your graphics. Some of this stuff is for, because of your graphics card may not be able to handle all of the higher level stuff, but also it could be for like certain accessibility issues as well, motion blur and so forth. Motion sickness could be a thing. Epilepsy could be a thing. So can you adjust things? And I don't know what just changed. I probably messed up. I'm just gonna do high graphics quality. Hopefully that doesn't mess something up. Chromatic aberration. So you're adjusting for chromatic aberration. And so these are just different things that you can adjust for visual quality. And it looks like we don't have the option to use a keyboard, a controller. So I have to use the keyboard. And this is just letting you set. Can you customize? Yes, you can. You can customize your key bindings if you need it to be something else. So that is a little bit of flexibility. So if I paid attention to that, I could adjust my key bindings so that, since I have small hands, that I could change the key bindings to fit me. But then I'd have to remember to do that for every game that I played so that it's always consistent, because otherwise it would just be cognitive overload for me to remember what key bindings I set up differently. I've actually had in the past had to have up on another screen the list of key bindings for a game because their on-binding was horrific and I couldn't remember what key did what, so I had to keep a list to the side so I could remember. That's not a great way to design stuff. And sound, they let you adjust the sound levels. Let's see. I'm going to turn the music down because I've got music playing. And that way I can let you hear sound effects at least. Okay, you can see if that works. And yes, you can. Why did it just change my music volume back up? That's rather annoying. Oh, I have to hit enter to save way down there at the bottom. Okay. And yeah, they've got a good range of that. I was actually talking about this, I think it was last week or the week before last, language selection and internationalization. So this icon is great because this is I'm assuming, you'd have to test it. I'm assuming this is a well-known icon for Translate because it's the icon that's used on translator apps out there. The problem is that if you are not a native English speaker and you, for example, speak Chinese or Japanese, the fact that because that's a completely different alphabet, okay? And if you are not fluent in English, how are you going to know that that says Japanese? It's a completely different alphabet. How are you going to know that? So the best practice for internationalization for language selection menus, and I'm kind of surprised that this is this way because I hadn't seen it in so long, is you put it in the language that it is. Japanese should be in kanji and it should say Nihongo. French should be français. Spanish, where's Spanish? Should be español, Italiano. They should be in the language that they are so that people can recognize their language. But everything here is in English, which is not good international design. So also keep that in mind when you are designing your experiences. And let's see what else. We can adjust our sensitivity. I believe I adjusted the sensitivity of the mouse previously because I have sensitivity to motion, and if the mouse is moving the environment too quickly, especially in a first-person game, it's gonna make me nauseous. So I have to reduce the mouse sensitivity for that reason on first-person games, especially. Anytime that I'm using a mouse and a keyboard and the mouse is controlling the camera movement, I have to lower the mouse sensitivity. Oh, can you choose a controller? Xbox. That's it. Just Xbox. That's it. So you can, but again, it only... Wait, it says DualShock 4. I kind of want to see what happens. So I'm going to see what happens. Okay. But all of the tooltips are still in keyboard. So I've got my controller. And all of the tooltips are in Xbox. They're not. So that was the concern that I was having when I saw it's categorized as one controller. Xbox and DualShock. Which do you think they're going to use as the tooltip in that situation? Xbox. And so now this is what we're talking about, cognitive load. I'm using the D-pad right now to move through the things. That's going to be the same on both. But A, what's A? I don't know what A is. I don't play on an Xbox. So now I have to mentally figure out which button. But I'm afraid which button to push, because if I push the wrong one, I could accidentally exit the game. Because B is exit game. So we're going to hit X. So I think X is A. And that's right. Okay, good. So then I'm guessing B is circle. However, now there's an X. But the X on that tooltip that's down... I touched my keyboard. The X that is down there is not the X that's here. That's the A. So this is what I'm talking about, mental cognitive workload. Just put the right tooltips on there. If I'm using a Sony, give me the option for a Sony and then show me the Sony tooltips. That is a good design. And you especially want to think about that for XR because it is possible, especially with a PC-based headset, that you can use a different controller than the one that came with it. So you could have a Vive controller with Valve Index knuckles. It happens all the time because those knuckles are way better than the ones that come with the Vive. So a lot of people will get the knuckles and use those. It's less common of thing with the Oculus. So if you're designing something for Oculus, that's going to be less common. But with PC-based, it's definitely a possibility that that's going to happen. Not the Rift, because I don't think they'll even work because it's different technology. But for like the Vive and the Index and those, you can switch the controllers out. The technology works similarly, so you can switch those out. So yeah, so it's just an extra level of cognitive load, and I'm going to be focusing on that more than I am on what I need to learn. So I'm not going to use the controller because I don't want to deal with figuring out the tooltips. So I'm switching to keyboard, and all I had to do was move my mouse and it switched back to those tooltips. But I can't see my mouse, so I'm going to use the arrows on my keyboard. Does tab move you through? E. To get back to the controller settings so that I can change it back to mouse and keyboard. Okay, now my mouse is back. Yeah, there are games that I've seen that will just detect it and switch automatically. Those games are awesome. One of those games is Voice of Cards. It's a Square Enix game, and it will just automatically detect. Am I using my... That happens with Final Fantasy 14 as well. I don't know about any of the other Final Fantasies. So that's good design. Just detect which one I'm using and switch. That's Square Enix. Okay, let's play the demo. I've got a new one set up already. Otherwise, they would be all separate slots. It's nice that they have game slots for multiple people who want to play. That would be something that, I don't know, if you would need to see, research your audience to see, is there how you would handle profiles and stuff for training if you have multiple people sharing the same headset. Generally, in my experience, when you do that, it's a trainer is handling it and they're putting people through the training. Even if it's a solo training, there's a trainer there helping them. So far with my stuff. Now, it'll change in the future. If it hasn't already, that they'll maybe have one trainer but multiple people, but there will always be a trainer. But you're to oversee stuff. But yeah, figuring out how to associate different trainees' profiles with their performance and their successful completion or not, the results of all the training and stuff, there's going to have to be a way to track that. And I don't know what they've done so far. I know that they were definitely working on it when I was at that company. I'm sure they've figured some stuff out by now. It's been a few years. But I don't know the details of that, how you handle that. But it is something to think about. How you would handle that. Multiple profiles for multiple trainees in an organization, if you want to track their results and stuff. And it is, assuming it's my first play, well, it's if it's your first play, we recommend to play the basic tutorial. So we're going to do that and hope that this doesn't crash, because this is where it has been crashing on me lately. Okay, good, it did not. So as we begin, first of all, I really like that all of the... So you had two choices here in how you designed the environment, at least two. And one choice was to have a full color, fully detailed warehouse where everything in here has color and material on it. But as you can see, as we look around this warehouse, that there are only certain objects in this warehouse that have full color. Everything else is white and muted. This is a very, very nice way to help someone focus and to reduce that amount of awe factor that you have to deal with when you're first going into a training sim. So I actually like this as a treatment for a VR training experience. And when you're first getting them in there, only the things that they need to be focused on are in color. And even right now, it could be less. They could have, let's see, paper. I don't have anyone in chat right now to help me with notes. It would be awesome if I had live people in chat helping me with notes. That would also give you experience. Participating. I can't find my pen. Where did my pen go? Oh, I don't know where my pen went. I'll get a new one. I don't know what I did with it. That's gonna bug me. So, it's gonna take me a while to write this. So ideally, when you're doing a design review, you would have more than one person because it'll be faster and more productive to have your team or whatever together, or a couple of people on your team working. One's talking and going through it while the other one's taking notes is basically the ideal way of doing it for VR and XR, because again, this is very time consuming. So another way would just be to do voiceover and then take notes later, but that's more time consuming. Unless you have some kind of dictation app or something, that would be awesome. I don't. Those cost money. So I'm gonna make I'm gonna make separate pieces of paper so I can keep my notes. But I like that it starts with a white room. But what they could do is, instead of having even these other things in color, since the phone is what's glowing, that's the thing that you're supposed to be going through first, because as you can see in the top left corner, I can't move my mouse to point to it because that is how I'm controlling the camera. Is that approach the phone and take the order. That's the controls in the top left corner. And I also like that they have that in the corner telling you what your task is. What are you supposed to be doing right now? So I like that they have the task tutorial orders there, and that the environment is white, and that so that you're not focused on it. The only thing you're focused on is the objects you're going to be learning about. And the thing that is highlighted is the phone, because that's what you're supposed to be going towards next. So I like that the starts in the white room with only objects you're learning about highlighted. I'm assuming these are only the objects we're learning about in color. And then phone is highlighted. And then one of the things that I wish I could show you both so that I could do both at the same time, but I don't have the setup to do that right now. So I could just do the rose thorn bud while we're doing it. Could have only phone in color. And highlighted for more more focus. And I also like that they have the goals in the corner. Okay. So I don't see any tooltips though. So they are assuming that I know how to use a keyboard and mouse to move around. Okay, now there is a tooltip. I like that they show a tooltip when you're hovering over the object to show you if you can see it down at the bottom, in the middle, the bottom of the screen. I think just left click to use the phone. Tooltips show on hover, object hover. And I don't like that the controller tooltips are only Xbox. Okay. So let's use it. So we've got this list of orders, I guess. So welcome to Car Mechanics Simulator. In this tutorial, we'll teach you the basics of the mechanics in the game, handling orders, changing fluids and oil, changing tires and servicing the spring compressor. Change the oil and additional tasks. Drain old, refill with new, and additional tasks. I don't know what this is. Normal order, story order. And then apparently there are some more things that you can do that just aren't available in this free. I'm assuming it's in the tutorial because it's keeping us focused on the objectives. And also it's also the free version, so I'm wondering what's locked because of the free version. So I have to hit enter to take the order. Okay, so now I've got my car here that I'm working on. And I need to open the hood, so it's got the hood highlighted as the next thing that I need to interact with, which is a good practice. Highlight the thing that they're supposed to be working on. Again, because right now we're just teaching, we're not testing competency. So in this case, we would have the hood highlighted. If we were testing competency, we would not have the hood highlighted. And we would potentially not give them the steps. It depends. Now, if they are going to be in real life, always have a checklist of things to do, then you would let them have the checklist. In the competency test, it's not fair to not, if that's not going to be the case in the real world. If they're going to have a checklist, let them have the checklist in the competency test. But if they're not, then don't. That's one thing that I noticed when I was doing usability testing with training sims for my group, was that they were saying, well, we wouldn't be doing this solo. We would be talking with a team. We would be doing this. So our training should be with the team. Yes. That's what you find out when you do research up front. That would have saved time on the actual build to design it so that you would work with your team if that's how it would be in real life. That would be the best and most effective way of training, is training them with a team, because the team holds each other accountable in that situation. This is just changing oil, so it's not a high risk situation that could end up with people, hopefully, with people dying. I guess if you're using, there might be some safety things here with using the lift. You might want other people with you using the lift and stuff, because that could be dangerous. But in certain situations, yeah, but then you would teach them, do this with a friend. So we're going to, I guess we're checking fluids right now. Is why we're checking the windshield washer reservoir. Take up the reservoir cap. Focus on the part, or take it off, you hold. Okay? I don't like that it keeps changing my camera view. I wanted to control my camera view. You don't want to change their camera view in VR. Do not do that. because that is going to make them sick and cause them to be disoriented because they are surrounded by the environment. You just act like it's real life. Would the environment change when they removed the reservoir lid? No. So don't do that. In real life, it would stay still. We would move. So design it that way. Don't pan, don't zoom for them. Give them control. And so now we have to add fluid. To add fluid, we hold the button to add more reservoir fluid, and it's automatically stopping when it's full, which is nice. Because unless that's something you're wanting to test competency on, what's the fill line? How are they paying attention to the fill line? I don't know. Right now we're just training though, but maybe it would be something that you would tell them, pay attention to the fill line. Don't know. I would mention it, probably. Hit escape to close, and that changed the view again. Again, don't do that in a VR or an XR training sim. Don't zoom in and out for them. That can be disorienting and can cause motion sickness. Okay, so now use the upper button to lift the car, but that is kind of out of my view right now because I'm looking at the car, which missing all of its hoses, actually. Interesting. But again, I guess that's not what we're learning. Upper button, so that wasn't in my view. So, potentially it would have, so now if this were VR and that wasn't in my view, I would say upper button to lift the car. So I might want to be a little bit more clear, especially if we're brand new to this whole car mechanic thing. The car is on a lift now. Okay, I can see that it's on a lift now if I look back, but it had moved me up to the actual car so I couldn't see the full view because again, this is in 2D, not VR. What I would have done is I would have had them over here taking the order from the phone or whatever. I would have said actually maybe even have a clipboard there or something for them. And now, and they control their movement. So you don't like auto teleport them over to the car. You just let them go up to the car. And that way they can see, oh, the car's already on the lift. It's already raised. I didn't even notice that. Because I was already up close to the car. So now we're pushing the button. And if it were out of my view, I would have like maybe had some kind of wayfinding arrow blinking somewhere within my line of sight saying, look up, look up. Okay, now I'm looking up. Now we can go over here and go to the button to lift the car. And I would have added a little bit of safety info here, saying, hey, make sure the area is clear, that there's nobody around this thing as you start lifting it. Add a little bit of safety in there too, saying, hey, make sure that you're taking care of this and make sure the car's securely on the lift and so forth before you lift it and all that stuff. I would have covered that. But I guess we're learning how to do an oil change, but that's part of it, so I would include it. So I would mention that it doesn't include the safety lift safety and stuff. And I don't like that it's auto zooming panning. There are other ways to handle that. So if you want them to see detail on something, there are other ways to handle it besides panning the camera's view. You can just move the individual object. You could bring up diagrams. There are other ways of handling it than... And how would it be in real life anyway? There are other ways of doing it. So... Okay, so I need to approach the oil drain. So that's this thing over here that's glowing. and use. So is this moving? Okay, so when you hover over it, it's... So I need to move the equipment to the car lift A. Okay. So now it's over here. Use the oil drain to get rid of the old oil. So I'm clicking on the oil drain. But what they didn't teach me is where to find the oil cap to release the fluid from the car. They didn't show me that. So it's skipping steps. Important steps, especially if what you're training them on is how to drain oil. You need to show them where the little cap is that you need to open to drain the oil. It's not magic. So it's... So you're supposed to be training them on oil changing. Didn't show where to find a little cap to release oil. That's something that's kind of important because you don't want to drain the wrong thing. That would be bad. Put the oil drain to its place. Okay. Move it. Put it back. Okay. Click on the suspension. Okay. What are we checking on the suspension? Okay, now we're looking at oil stuff. Okay, there it is. Take off the old oil filter. Open the pie menu by right-clicking. And so it's telling me what I can and can't interact with right now, which is nice. So I would say that that's a good thing. Disabling menu items that I can't click on. During the tutorial. That's a good way of helping you focus. So the part... So wait. Change to part mount mode, and now mount a new filter. So to mount the part, hold down on the button, and then I choose a new filter. I put the new filter on. And now I need to lower the lift. Did they put the cap back on the oil, or is it still open? Didn't teach it. That's an important thing to teach. It didn't tell them. Put cap back on. Important things. Okay, the engine. Click on the engine. Take off the oil plug. this thing up here. I didn't mean to do that. Go away. Hold down to take it off. And I don't like that it keeps changing my view. I want control of my view. Add fluid by holding down. And this would be an important one to be able to track. How do I know when it's full? I don't know. How do I know when this is full? Is it gonna stop? How do I know by seeing whether or not it's full? Is it gonna stop when it's full? Don't know. Because it stopped on the other one, so that's not consistent. Don't know when. Enough oil added. Isn't it inconsistent? And there was an inconsistency. Auto stops on the wiper fluid, but not on oil. Not on the oil. So I don't know. Was that enough? No idea. How do you know when there's enough? How do you know when there's too much? What's the indicator? And I'm just double checking time. So now we need to check the suspension for the tire. We need to change the tire. Okay. Click on the right wheel, front right wheel. Okay. Take off the wheel. Hold down to take it off. So we're... And I mentioned this last week, that it's good when you're not teaching them how to screw or unscrew something. Of course, actually, in this case, you might be teaching them how to use the hydraulic compressor to remove and add the nuts vac to the tire. That's important, that you don't overdo it and strip them, because that can make it harder for someone who has a roadside issue. Their tire goes flat and they need to get the nuts off of the tire, but whoever was using the hydraulic equipment stripped the nut and now they can't get the tire off. It happens. I've seen it happen. And so, yeah, that would be something you would also want to teach. Maybe it's not something you can teach in this 2D setting, but it would be something that you would want to teach. So the tire changer. So now another example of, what does the tire changer look like? Where is it? I'm looking at the car. It would be nice to have a little arrow in my view. It says that way. There it is. So that would be a bud. Use wayfinding arrows and tools, equipment helps the field of view. Get them to look where you want them to look. That's something that you want to do in VR. Or you could also use spatial sound. Or both. I would say use both. would say use the combination, because you could have someone who can't hear or for various reasons. Could be a disability, could be that they can't turn it up right now because of some other external world need. So use multiple sensory methods, not just one stuff. Here's our tire changer. Pick separate parts option from the pie menu. Separate parts. Because we're separating the tire from the rim. So this is something I learned. That's what that does. That's how you get it off. Okay. Take the parts. And then where am I still using this one? Okay, okay. Install, so I'm putting a new tire on the rim. We're getting a new tire. That's a shiny tire. That rim is... I don't know if that's supposed to look like that or not. Take the wheel. I don't... That icon doesn't make sense. That red minus sign seems negative, so... But at least they have a label accompanied with it, so it helps me know what it means, because that minus sign, the red minus sign doesn't... It seems like it's something you don't want to do, but... Okay, approach the wheel balancer. So this is the wheel balancer, and I like that it tells you what it is when you hover over it. But now that we're done with this, it doesn't tell you what that is anymore. I don't remember what it's called. Approach the wheel balancer and pick balance option from the pie menu. And we're wanting to balance our new tire. So adjust the marker into green area to balance. How do I do that? A. Now what? That's not actually teaching me how to do that with the actual machine, unless that is a display that I can use to help. If that's what was showing on the display, then fine. But if there's some other way that you're supposed to be doing that, then they need to teach you that. Hopefully that's what I was seeing was how you do it. Yeah, I like it says the wheel's already balanced. So this is good signs and feedback. That's a good thing. Good feedback. Just disable buttons. First step's already done. And they said why. So the wheel is already balanced. Wheel is already. So I did that. Good. And it's disabled, so it doesn't let me waste time balancing it again. Now I go back to the car. Put it back on the car. Open the pie menu. Oh, right click. I forgot how to... Did it show me? I don't think it did. Because I was... Yeah, it didn't... So the tooltips went away. I would say don't take away the tooltips. Just keep them. Why would you take them away? Tooltips. Disappeared. Went away. Add to gas. How to open my menu. Right click. Okay, now the tooltips are back. Okay, now we put the tire back on. We're putting on the new one. Okay, now we're going to the other wheel. So, I want to see something. I want to see, can I come back over? No, I can't. Oh, maybe I can. Let's see. Nope, I can't come back and see my orders. I can't. Because I want to see the list of everything I'm supposed to be doing. I can't. It's like, it's just walking me through step by step, but I want to see my whole list. I'm going to put that down as a Thorn. Can't reference my full order list. Only seeing the next step in that top left. Taskbar. Because I want to see my whole list. I like seeing ahead. What are we doing? We're taking off the wheel. Okay. I'll probably need to stop soon. Take off the sway bar link. Okay. And so it's not wasting time teaching you how to screw and unscrew things, which is nice. It's auto animating steps that it's not focused on teaching, like how to unscrew something. Because that could get frustrating in VR for sure. It's not what they're learning. So the front shock absorber. Take off the shock absorber. So we unscrewed everything? Okay. Thank you. I was about to say, I don't think that's fully unscrewed. Okay. We removed the shock absorber. Now, oh, we have to go over here to this thingy. This spring puller. Separate parts. So we're separating the spring from the shock absorber. Okay. Take off the parts. Okay. And then we're still using it. And we're putting on a new shock absorber or a new spring. What are we putting on? Are we replacing the shock absorber? See, I wish I knew what we were doing right now because I can't see the full list. What are we replacing here? Thanks for following. Appreciate it, South Station. I don't know what we're actually doing here. Are we replacing the shock absorber or the spring, the whole thing? I don't know. And then approach the car. I did that because I don't like the motion. Open the pie menu and change to part mount mode. Okay, I have to right click to open the pie menu because they didn't have the tooltip up. And everything that I'm not supposed to be doing is disabled, which is cool. Keeping me focused. Mount the shock absorber. And this is our new one. Mount the sway bar. No. Wait. Where is it? Okay. Now put the wheel back on. And now open the pie menu and click on car status. And switch the tab to order summary. Is this the order summary? It would be nice if they hovered, if they added what this is. Okay, this is the order summary. What I also am wondering is, because I saw that we were putting on new parts, but those new parts weren't necessarily great parts. So Joust Station says, how do you feel about losing concepts of normal and reverse threads for pivoted components? Oh yeah, that's a good question. Because I was mentioning it earlier too, is like when you're using hydraulic, if I'm understanding what you're saying. Because it's not teaching them all of some details that I think are probably important. Like when you're, especially like when you're using hydraulic tools of, it's not teaching them everything they need to know, really. Like, especially if they were like brand new to this, and I'm brand new to it. I mean, I know a little bit because I've watched my brother and my father do stuff. But I don't know enough. And so like hydraulics, I have seen where people don't effectively use the hydraulic. I don't know what it's called even, but it uses hydraulics to screw on the bolts onto the tire. But if you do it too far, you can strip the bolts. And then I have seen where someone has needed to change their tire on the side of the road or in a parking lot because they have a flat tire, but it was overstripped because they went too far on that with the hydraulic compressor thingy. I don't know what it's called. And so it was very hard to get the bolt off to change the tire. So yeah, I think that's something that should be taught, especially like in a training. So, but yeah. So yeah, then they're not taught. I think I know what you're talking about. Pivoted components. That it's something they should teach. Yeah. So they're missing that. Okay, open the pie menu and pick the car status and switch tab to order summary. I did that and click finish order. But I want to see what these other tabs are. Issues to fix, front spring. So it was the spring we were fixing? Okay, oil filter, sport tire. So we needed a new tire. And this was the order. Change the oil, drain all the fluids, refill, and okay. I think this order isn't exactly a detailed order either. Pneumatic wrench. Okay, yeah, that's it. So the basic tutorial is completed. And if you need further help, make sure to check out the tutorial section in the main menu where you can find detailed information about all aspects of the game. Okay, so we're done with the actual tutorial, the free demo, so that's all I can do with it. Thanks for following, Credunk. I don't hear the alerts, so sorry if I miss any of new people that have followed. That's it for our demo. And so let's go back and work on Rose Thorn Bud. Let me get that going. Okay, I was trying to take some notes while we were going. So the Rose Thorn Bud exercise is what we do after we walk through each game that we're going through. And it's just a quick exercise for critical thinking. And the roses are what went well, what was a highlight, what did you like? And the thorns are what didn't go well, what was a low point, what did you not like? And then buds are what opportunities do you see, what would you do differently next time, what are some follow-up things, what questions do you have? And the benefit of doing this Rose Thorn Bud exercise is that you can quickly see what's good, what's not working, what do we need to do about it. And this method of doing things really quick and concise post-its. It's one of the reasons I like doing post-its is because the thoughts are very quick and concise. It's not a long dissertation. It's just quick and concise points. And I'm going to walk you through that based on what we've done here. But the benefit of this is that you can then take this information and change it into multiple things. So you can use the Rose Thorn Bud for all kinds of things, not just evaluating a solution. You can also use it for like how's your team working together? How did an experience out at a location work? How did an event go? You can use it for all kinds of things. And I use it a lot for research because and if you check my videos on demand, you'll see me doing the actual synthesis from the last set, which was platformers, where each game I went through and I did a Rose Thorn Bud. And then since I kept it short and concise in the post-it format, I was able to then go back and synthesize that information into a bigger learning of platformers. So what are the trends in platformers? What are the things that are working well? What are the things that are not working well that we need to think about? And what are the things that we could do about it? And how does that translate into XR? So keeping it in this format lets us create multiple types of outputs. And so now that I synthesized that, I can go back and write a report, which is what I'm working on off screen, is writing a report on that. So what did we learn from it? And what are the best practices that we can get out of that? And that's going to end up being an article that I publish and a talk, potentially a talk that I do about platformers, about tabletop RPGs is another one, and then eventually about training. So these are, it's a good exercise that keeps it in a raw enough form that you can do a lot of different things with it. So now, I took some notes. So one of the cool things is that if y'all can show up and participate in the chat, I know life's difficult, life's busy. So it's not always easy to do that, but if you can, then you can help take notes in the chat and participate like you were just talking about with the wrench and the threads, the reverse threading and so forth. Participating in the Rose Thorn Bud is going to give you experience doing it, and it's going to give you experience working on a team to analyze something, and that's only going to help you. And so now I've written them down, so I'm just going to start working on them on here. So I like, so what's good, what went well, what was the highlight? So at the beginning, the whole room starts, the environment starts with all of the objects white, except the things we're going to be learning about. So the things that we were learning about are in full color. So the equipment, the objects, things like that. Equipment. And then that helps. That helps with focus and awe factor if it were in XR. And the 2D game, it helps with focus, but if this were in an XR, it would help the awe factor. And the phone is highlighted as first object to interact with first step. This is the first step. You go check the phone. And then I also like that there is a task goal list. Stays in the top left corner. So you always know what you're gonna do, what your goal is, what your current goal is. And there are tooltips that show on whenever you have it hover over an object. On how to interact with them. And then I like that it is disabling. Here, let me see. I like that it is disabling the menu items that aren't relevant to the tutorial. So you're only focusing on the things that you're learning. And they also had good feedback, informative feedback on buttons that are disabled for steps already taken. So for example, wheel is already balanced. When I hovered over to click on it, it said wheel's already balanced. You don't need to do this again. Balance wheel option. Okay. And it's automatically animating the steps that aren't relevant. Animating that's not relevant. To learning. Can't type today. Adding a nut to a bolt. Now, under Thorns, so we're keeping the good things separate. I know that there were some negatives to some things, but we're keeping them distinctly separate, and we can visually connect them if we need to with lines. That's why I like Miro and stuff. So you can visually see, and again, it's keeping the notes short and concise, and so that we can make it into a bunch of different things. So what didn't go well was the controller tooltips. Are only Xbox, even though supports PS4. There are no PS4 tooltips. And doesn't include safety training. Like, for example, car lift. And let's see. And it also doesn't teach importance of not overstripping the wheel nuts with the pneumatic wrench. Thank you for reminding me what that's called. With the pneumatic wrench. And then I'm gonna add your Thorn too. Is that a Thorn that you had? Let me see. It was trying to scroll. It's not covering. Let me know if it's right. It's not covering concepts of normal and reverse threads or pivoted components. So these are like basic things that you should probably train someone as a newbie. And then that is kind of a category here. Well, I'll just keep them together here. And I'm pretty sure that wheel separator probably had some kind of safety training that should have gone with that too. That didn't teach any of the safety on that. That if you were doing this in XR, you would want to include that, definitely, because that's important. You don't want people losing hands and fingers and whatever. And the camera is auto panning and zooming. There are other ways that you can handle that for a VR to keep people from getting sick. Motion sickness and disorientation. If you were in XR, if you auto pan and zoom, and so you don't want to do that. So, and they're skipping steps that they're supposed to be training on. For example, you're teaching them how to change oil, but not showing where to find cap to remove old oil. They just automated that. They automated that process. And then didn't tell them. Oh wait, is this in present tense? It's good to do these in present tense. It's just a little mind game to write it in present tense because this is the current state of the thing. And it's a practice. I think I learned this from Chris Nossel when I was guest writing for his site, sci-fi-interfaces.com. I recommend you check it out. It's awesome if you like sci-fi. Put it in the chat. Is that he always writes everything in present tense, even for like the films and stuff that he's talking about. It's just a mental brain trick. I don't remember why I learned to do it, but it helps me think of things in present tense, and it helps me. This is the current state of the thing, at least for me, because I don't remember the why I learned to do it this way. It helps me to think this is the current state. It's not a past state. It didn't change. It's still the current state. So that's why I still do it, even though I don't remember the original why of why I learned to write in present tense for this stuff instead of past tense. It doesn't show where to remove the oil, and it doesn't teach importance of making sure you put the cap back on. So all the oil doesn't fall out when you put new oil in. Because it just automatically animated that part. So if this were actual training, I know this is just a video game that we're doing here, but if it was actual training, you would want to include that for sure. Don't know how to tell when there's enough oil added. And there was an inconsistency there because when I was adding the wiper fluid, it automatically stops when the reservoir is full. However, with the oil, man, just keeps flowing, doesn't stop. So I don't know how do you know when there's enough oil? Those are tied together. I'm gonna tie them together. They're over here. So another good thing about using the post-its is you can still have context even without writing the dissertation, just by visually connecting things and visually grouping things. So you don't have to write a full-on report for rapid research like this. That helps in the long run. Now, the con is that every now and then I'll have to go back and double check something. I'll have to reopen the game or go check a video. That's another thing is I recommend videotaping your research. Video recording your research is so that you can go back and check in case you don't have access to the thing that you were researching again, you at least have a recording. Sorry, I missed your comment. So it's a really interesting balance between not being pedantic about making people do mundane things versus actually making sure they learn something. Yeah. So I like that they automatically did some things, like there were some parts where screwing in the bolts didn't really matter, for example, or removing the cap from the wiper fluid reservoir, for example. But there are things that you want them to actually learn, and yeah, there is a balance to that. And they skipped a bunch of steps that were important, and then they also didn't teach safety, like the car lift. How do you teach them the safety of making sure there's nobody around and so forth, so that they don't get hit by the lift, and car's firmly on there, making sure it's firmly on there so there's no car doesn't fall or anything. What are the safety steps for that? It didn't cover any of that. So there were inconsistencies, and then tooltips went away, so I had to guess how to open the time menu. Yeah. So at some point, it was after a few steps in the process. The tooltips go away when next step is to open the pie menu. So I have to stop and remember which button to push to open pie menu. There was nothing. There was not really any reason to remove the tooltips. They were not in the way at all. I mean, it wasn't a huge thing, but it wasn't for me, but maybe it would have been for someone else. But trying the buttons that I've learned so far, I was able to figure it out. So it wasn't like a huge deal, but I mean, there wasn't any reason to remove them, really. Oh yeah, I can't reference the full order list. Only the next step. So I'm not sure how many steps I've completed and how much is left in the order. And that's not how it would be in real life, for sure. And also, it was keeping me from remembering what I'm, to a point, what I'm learning. What am I supposed to be learning here? Because I'm thinking that part of what I'm supposed to be learning here as a mechanic is how to fill an order. But if I can't see the order, how do I make sure that I've completed everything on the order? How do I solidify my ability to fill the order if I can't see the order? I don't know if that makes sense. So let's see. Kurdonk, agree if this experience were in VR, are there any best practices on what kinds of interactions should be included to improve ensure learning transfer? You can animate the screws, but require them to grab and move the tower on their own. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you would. There were some things that were auto-animated in here that I would just say, just let them do. But in VR, you're not going to be able to learn as much about the pneumatic wrench, for example, because you can't feel it. And a big part of that is the feel. You can learn the sound and give some visual feedback of what might happen with the feel as a way of compensating that. But there were some things that they definitely left out that they should have included, and I would say definitely include in VR. To make sure that they're learning this. And again, this is a video game, so I mean, we can be forgiving on the video game. But yeah, if this were actual training. So I don't know if I'm answering your question though. So any best practice on what kinds of interactions should be included to improve and ensure learning transfer? I would say make them move the tower on their own. Make them move the oil. I've already forgotten what the thing was called, where you get the old oil. I forgot what the thing was called. So I didn't retain that. What's the thing called? The oil thingy. That captures the old liquid. And let them just move that stuff in VR. I've actually seen training sims where you can just pull the stuff out of a menu. It didn't really hurt anything by doing that, but letting them know where things are placed in a garage and teaching them to put things back in their places is a good practice, actually. So let them do that. You would have to work with a subject matter expert. So in this case, a master mechanic, to someone who runs a shop, to what are the best practices, what else should they be learning, and then work with them to know what that is definitely. You are very, very dependent when you're creating training for VR on working with the subject matter expert to make sure that you're covering the right things, and a trainer. So if there's an experienced, skilled trainer and I hear another train coming, it's probably going to get loud. Apologize, but you would work with a trainer, experienced trainer on this thing, and you would work with subject matter experts to make sure that you're covering the right content. And then you're, of course, always doing usability testing with target audience to make sure that they're learning and stuff. Was that all of the thorns? Let's see. I think that was all the thorns. And then, so for buds, we ideally we want to have at least one bud per thorn. I did have some buds that were unrelated. So let's see. Controller tooltips, only Xbox, even though it supports PS4. So add tooltips. This is a best practice. Add tooltips for each controller you support. Doesn't include safety training if so make sure training is thorough for a new person, a new employee, a novice. Train. Sorry, there's a very loud train coming by. And then visually connect these, because this one's definitely connected towards that. Work with experienced trainers and SMEs to ensure thorough content. And then you're gonna work. Yeah, I'm gonna post this article again. This is the best practices for training that I wrote based on my own experience in this space. I'll put it back in here. It's not very, very thorough. It is still high level, but it's a base place to start for training in XR. Work with experienced SMEs to ensure thorough content is coverage, and safety is a very important part of training with people. And even like review for people that have been there route, because people that have been working on a wall can get lazy, and it's often the experienced people that have the bad accidents because they get, it's not so much lazy, but too comfortable, I guess. Not covering some of the basic issues that you need to go over for newbies. I would say that's actually the same thing here. Don't take for granted. I have to remind myself of this all the time. Don't take for granted that everyone else knows what you know. I forget that all the time. I don't think it's anything arrogant. I think it's just that I don't think that I know anything special. So then I'll forget, okay, maybe not everyone knows this thing. It's less of a pride thing and more of a like lack of, it's not so much confidence either, but I can explain it. But it's like I don't have any kind of notions that I am this brilliant person that knows anything. That it's like if I know it, everyone must know it because I'm not brilliant. Like, that's basically my standpoint. But we forget and we forget and we take for granted. So don't do that. We all know things that other people don't know. All right. Having a child's eyes is the hardest design skill. Yeah. Yeah, because we take for granted what we know. See, camera is auto panning and zooming. Give the player full control of view of their motion. So and then for the parts for zooming and stuff, for zooming into parts, you can pull out the part instead of moving the player's view, instead of auto panning. What was worded well? Or badly? What was it? Something I said or something you said? Pull out the part instead of auto zooming. Skipping important steps that you're supposed to be training on. Again, that is working with the subject matter expert. Here. Oh, having a child's eyes. Well, it made sense. Okay. And now don't know how to tell when enough oil has been added. Teach it. Teach how to tell. And simple enough. Teach them. And then you want to ensure interactions are consistent to reduce confusion. And then after a few steps in the tutorial, yeah, well, keep your tooltips. Can only help. They don't get in the way. It can only help. You want them to focus on the content they're learning. Not how to interact with it. Okay, and then you can't reference the full order list. You'll also notice that I'm not being too detailed in my buds, because that gives the designer freedom over iteration and ideation to figure out what's the best solution here. So I don't get too descriptive in the design. Because of that, because I'm not so presumptive that I would know the best solution, unless there's a best practice. For example, giving player full control of motion. That is the best practice. Add tooltips for each controller you support. That's the best practice. Provide a way to reference the full order list. For example, a checklist or something. Okay. And then, so thinking about this in XR, I would say I really like starting the environment white with only focused objects in color is a great idea for XR, because in XR there is this awe factor that's going on. It takes care of the initial awe factor by preventing them from being overwhelmed. And it helps them focus on what they're learning. So I like that learning that we got from that. Is pretty cool learning. Oh, and there were some more buts that I wrote down that weren't related. Let's see. Oh yeah, so a bud would be that instead of having all of the so it had the environment white, but then only the objects that you're going to be interacting with during the tutorial were in full color, which is cool. I mean, there is a potential for giving even more focus by just having the phone in color, but that I would say that you would need to just explore and test, experiment with. It was just a potential for even more focus. First step, accept the first step, and then adding objects in color as you learn about them. That's not specifically related to any Thorn or anything. It was just based on this initial one that the whole environment starts white. And then was another bud that I had here. Use wayfinding arrows when the tools and equipment are out of field of view. So yeah, that was kind of a thorn. Is that next step is out of field of view. Sometimes a little harder to figure out where to go. So then a next step would be, or a bud would be to add wayfinding when the next step is out of field of view. And that could be and or flashing arrow and or sound, spatial audio. I would suggest using both. Better to use multiple senses. Especially in VR. Okay. I am gonna have to go soon because I have a meeting that I have to go to. But do you have any burning questions before we go? So thinking about translating into XR, that was a good thing. Also, motion is a very important thing. And motion sickness, animation. Very important factors to keep in mind. For XR, and let's see. Besides, I mean, because all of these things are things you want to think about. Was there something that I called out specifically about XR? I did there. What about wayfinding in XR, breadcrumbs, or so there are ways. Let's see. What did I call that article? There's a video too. Wayfinding in XR. Here. I'll put that article in here. So wayfinding is, this is an example of wayfinding. So you see in alt space, if I can zoom in, maybe. There's this little arrow with there's a sound effect that you hear in the game. There's a sound effect, but you're looking at it, but then there's also spatial audio. You can hear this little boing boing sound, spatial audio, that says there's something that way that's gonna grab your attention. And then the arrow says, go here. And then when you're in that experience, it will also have a little sign that shows in your field of view if you're not looking that way. Or like if you're in the apartment, because this is alt space and it's a rooftop apartment. And it will say, go to the arrow. It'll tell you go to the arrow. But then some other people have solved it by, if you're looking, so if you're supposed to be going this way and you're looking this way, first of all, there's audio, but then there could also be an arrow that shows, because you know where people are looking. And in the experience, you know where they're looking. So if they're looking this way and their next step is supposed to be that way, then you could have an arrow that comes up in that instance and points them go that way, so that they look that way. But then you can also include signs and stuff. And so one of the things that they also did was say, make the object glow of whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing next. So there's a glow on the object that you're supposed to be interacting with next. There's multiple things that you do for wayfinding. And so it's not the HUD, it's in the environment. I would recommend not doing things on the HUD, because that can be disorienting, and when you stick things to the HUD, it can be annoying. So whenever you're doing anything to do with the HUD, I would say you would follow the best practices for mixed reality and augmented reality heads-up displays. And that's usually placing things spatially in the environment. Even there's an awesome video that Chris Nossel did. I mentioned him earlier. Let me try to find it. Gorgeous. Catastrophic. If I can spell it. Here it is. Copy link. He talks about the Iron Man HUD specifically. So I highly recommend that one to watch. It's awesome. But yeah, it would be in the environment, and then you would include audio, spatial audio as well. I can add that within the environment to point people, to direct people where to look. There are multiple ways that you can do that. There's also a video that I did called, let's see, I've got it in here. Directing attention. Here. Directing attention in XR. So this is how you can use NPCs. If you have NPCs in your experience, in your training experience, how you can use them to get people to look where they need to look. Okay, so it is now 2:27. Did anyone else have any other questions? Real quick before we end. See, reduce the risk of scission, so make sure definitely don't auto pan or zoom. Use other methods. Thanks for hanging out. I enjoyed talking to y'all. Thanks. Y'all have a good day. Y'all have a good week. This will be up on YouTube later if you want to watch the whole thing, if you missed it. And the one from last week, the rover. I did a rover mechanic last week. So y'all have a good day, and I'll see y'all next week. I think we're doing wrench next week. Off the top of my head, I think it's going to be wrench. Desktop version. We'll see. But thanks. Y'all have a good day. Thanks for hanging out.